Well, thank you very much for inviting me here today to give this presentation. As John mentioned, I've been working at Aquatic Inc. and Aquatic Biological for over 35 years. I know I don't look that old, but I am, trust me. What I want to do is talk to you this morning about some of the things that I have experienced over, I gotta get my password right though, over those 35 years, and try to give you some idea of what we do as ichthyologists in the field. And the company Aquatic and Aquatic Biological is a private environmental consulting firm. We work for private industry, the state, as you will see, and the federal government, again, as you will see. We've worked in areas, most of our field work has actually been in the New England area, obviously because travel becomes very expensive outside of those areas, although we have done sampling down as far as Georgia. But in terms of laboratory work, we worked everywhere from Hong Kong, Hawaii, Louisiana, and all the way up and down the East Coast. So we form a very niche-oriented area where we look at environmental issues mainly throughout the New England area, but also throughout the U.S. Today, what I'm going to talk about is basically broken up into segments to make it a lot easier for me to kind of keep focused on what we need to do. I realize that I'm right before lunch, and the worst thing you could be as a speaker right before lunch, especially when it gets really close to lunch, people are kind of anxious to get out there. So I'll try to make sure I stay on time and keep it within the allotted time. What I'm going to talk about mainly are going to be, first, are fish interesting? What do we know about fish as species? There's a lot of adaptations. And then, of course, because this is a learning experience, there will be a quiz here in the middle of that first segment. So pay attention, you're going to get to vote, and you'll see what it is. Then the second segment is going to talk about how we collect fish and how we process fish. You know, as a fisheries biologist, we got to go to the field and obviously obtain our specimens and what we're trying to do with them and how we do that. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the field aspect of it and brought along some props here to show you some of the things that we do. The third is I'm going to talk about several projects. The first one is actually going to be in the Connecticut River. It's actually the Park River that flows into the Connecticut River down in Hartford, Connecticut. And in keeping with the theme of last night, being spooky and Halloween, that's going to have some of those aspects to it. The next is going to be the Great Lakes monitoring for contaminants. This is actually an EPA project. Ultimately, it's the 5 Great Lakes as well as some other lakes. We'll talk a little bit about that. And then the last project that we're going to talk about is going to be the Grand Isle Fish Hatchery, which we were intimately involved with, both on locating it in Grand Isle and looking at the environmental interactions between the hatchery and the Lake Champlain, our beloved lake, as well as some of the practical needs for raising fish in terms of water quality and how we designed studies to test some of the things that we needed to test, as well as what the ultimate outcome was in terms of engineering design. And with that, I'll wrap it up with a summary. So the first thing we're talking about is fisheries or ichthyology. And again, you'll hear ichthyologist, ichthyoplankton, which is another term we'll talk about in a minute. But basically, ichthyo means fish. Logi means study. So we're basically a study of fish. I'm an ichthyologist. I'm a person that studies fish, basically. The next area is ichthyoplankton. Okay, and again, the reason I wanted to bring this definitions up is the first half of it you recognize, ichthyo, which means fish. Plankton, which are basically fish. There are organisms that are, the definition would be they wander or drift, basically. So these are drifting fish, or as we know them, baby fish or larval fish. We all know that fish are cold-blooded. So they basically interact very closely with the temperature of their environment, the water, and how they break things down and feed and grow is highly dependent upon temperature. One of the things that surprised me a little bit when I first saw some of these statistics, but there are over 33,000 fish species in the world. Think about that. That's a significant amount of different types of fish. About 18,000 of them are saltwater fish or marine fish. And there are more than 15,000 species that are freshwater, live in lakes and streams like we have here. I went through a book of Fishes of Vermont that was published about 8-10 years ago and calculated how many fish they talk about. In the state of Vermont, there are about 75 fish species, give or take a couple, and some of them, have been here for a long while, and some of them have actually recently introduced. When we talk about fish, we talk about three types of fish, basically. The first is agnatha, which, for those of you that are familiar with the Lake Champlain sea lamprey, those fishes would actually fall in that agnatha, which basically means without a mouth. The next general group of fish is chronodicthes. And again, if you look at the second half of that word, you see ichthyes, and the chrondo actually refers to cartilaginous. So these are actually cartilaginous fish. Sharks are a good example, as well as skates and rays are also fall into that group. And the third group is what we mostly associate with fisheries and fish in this area, and that's osteichthyes. And again, ostia means bone. So these are bony fish. Their skeleton is actually made of bone, not cartilage. And they're a wide group of fish, and a lot of the fish that we have in Lake Champlain obviously are bony fish. We're all familiar with Dory and Nemo and a couple of those species. The interesting thing about the clownfish, which is on the right there, that's Nemo, is that fish actually has a nice relationship with these sea anemones, which have stingers, and it protects the fish. Okay, it's immune from the stingers of the sea anemone, and it hides down in there, and it provides, I presume, some support for the sea anemone, but it provides the clownfish protection. But there are a variety of shapes and types of fish that we see. I know many of us know fish, seahorses. You have other fish. It's another type of marine fish. They actually vertically orient in the water. This here, I can get this to work. There we go. This here is a sea dragon, and it's made to look like, its actual natural shape is to look like leaves or vegetation that's in the water, so it can camouflage itself. This is a denizen of the deep, a sailfish, and then over here is what people refer to as a flying fish. And as you can see, its fins are actually extended, they could look like it has wings. When you see these fish, if they get spooked, they actually leave the water and will hover over the water, maybe glide for about 40 or 50 feet and come back down. And this is the way they escape prey. So they've developed an adaptation of getting out of the way. If they stay in the water, even if they swim, fish like sailfish will be able to find them a lot easier and detect them. But by jumping, if you will, 40 or 50 feet in the air, they're able to escape a lot of the prey. So that's their defense mechanism. And these are just some of the fish that we might talk about when we talk about freshwater. Many of these are in Lake Champlain. You have, catfish. These are herring, black crappie, bluegill, the carp, and then, of course, everyone's favorite, the American eel. Those are also, found in Lake Champlain and in various bodies of water. We talk about different types of fish and where they came from or where they were originating from. In the East Coast, the brook trout is a native fish. It's been on the East Coast for as long as we've studied fish and recorded them here in the North America. Might add that that's probably one of my favorite fish ever in terms of just beauty. It may not look beautiful to you, but it does to me. Second only to my wife, of course, who's sitting over here, so I got to say that. But we talk about exotic species too, fish that were not originally from this area, but somehow got introduced or migrated to the area. And on top here is the white perch. And the white perch is not originally found in Lake Champlain. It actually moved up, they believe, through the canals in about 1981. I think it was first discovered in South Lake, down in southern part of Lake Champlain. It then was found first time in 1986 off of the Winooski River mouth. I know that capture pretty well because that was me. And now it's found throughout the lake, and it's in a variety of fishermen's catches during the day. It's related, for those of you that may know what a striped bass is, it's very closely related to a striped bass. It gets to about 10, 12 inches in terms of size. That'd be a big size fish. The second fish here is a lionfish. And the top fin, or dorsal fin as we call it, actually has spines, and it has poison on them. If you get them stuck in your arm or step on them or something, they actually give you a very, very serious sting, and may require medical attention. The reason I have that one up there is it actually originated in Europe. That's where it was originally found, and somehow has migrated and is now found throughout the Florida Keys. And it's a serious problem because it competes with other fish on the reefs down there. And they actually have rodeos where people go out and collect them to try to reduce the population and get rid of them, although that probably won't happen, but it will at least keep the population under control. And the third exotic species, which I know is found, one of the species found in some of the water bodies in Florida, and you're probably all familiar with this if you've gone to different restaurants. This is a tilapia, which seems to be a common food fish now in many restaurants. It's what I basically call an Asian sunfish. Okay, so it was originally from Asia, and now, as I said, it's a very, very popular food fish on the menu at many restaurants. Now we're back to ichthyoplankton. Again, wandering fish, baby fish, if you will. And this is all, except for the egg, which is here, these are all the same species of fish. And to give you an idea, these fish are less than a half an inch long. What I did was actually bring an example. Pass a couple of these around. There's probably 20 or 30 fish in here. Ichthyoplankton, larval fish. Just to give you an idea of what the size is. So if you just roll that vial back and forth, you can see what the sizes are. And this is also very important. It's a very vulnerable life stage of the fish. So we do study this fish very, very intensely in some situations. Now comes the quiz, okay? As I said before, these fish on the left are all the same fish. And basically your choices are 4 species of fish over here. So just by show of hands, you're looking at these fish. What do you think they grow up to be? Do you think a smallmouth bass, white perch, a flounder, or a lake trout? Those are think smallmouth bass? Okay. How about a white perch? How about a flounder? And how about a lake trout? I'll give you a hint. Look at this fish right here. This is a later developed fish. You know what it is? You got it right. It's a flounder. Okay, so that's what it looks like when it's a half an inch long. The one thing you notice about these fish is there's eyes on both sides. But as it develops, to there, the eye actually migrates. As you can see, this eye is really on top of the head. And ultimately, you'll wind up with both eyes on the side, and the fish will become flattened. These fish live on the bottom of the ocean, and they're relatively, they're relatively flat, and they basically use the eyes which are sitting on the bottom, and they're looking up to their prey. You turn the fish over, or if it gets up in the water column, it's white. And why is that? Because if the fish, a predator, is below it, it looks up, it sees white against the white backdrop because that's where the light's coming in from the ocean. So it's really interesting to see these little fish and then try to figure out what they are. There are ways you can tell. You know, here is the digestive system, so it's less than half the length of the fish. And then there's some different pigments, black spots here, that are used to actually identify these fish when they're at this size. And basically, just to summarize our fish segment here is, basically the fish come in all shapes and sizes. They can adapt to almost any aquatic environment. There's freshwater, there's salt water, and there's actually some that can breathe air when the water runs out, like in Africa or South America, where you have monsoon seasons and things dry up. They can actually live in mud and actually gulp air or actually breathe air through skin even. They can live in the water column, free swimming like lake trout or sailfish, or like the flounder, they can live on the bottom. And then the life cycle, the eggs and larvae and adults all adapt to their environment to obviously prevent them from being attacked by predators as much as possible and survive to adulthood. We'll go on to the next segment, which is, okay, now we know what they are. How do we collect them? Let me get this mouse to, okay. Skip ahead here and just go back. Okay, so now we're going to talk about what, as a fisheries biologist, how do we collect fish? One of the primary ways that I've used over the years is electrofishing. And I'll give you actually a demonstration here in a few minutes of some of these things. It's a very, very unique way and allows you to look for the fish that you're looking for, the specific species, and also it's a very, very low impact on the fish. Nets, all have seen trawls and things of that nature. Plankton nets, that's how we catch our ichthyoplankton, and I'll show you that one in a minute. And then, of course, once we get the fish, we identify them, weigh them, and measure them, and then, of course, report it. So electrofishing basically temporarily immobilizes, and it basically is what it sounds like. We put electrical current to the water, and it's frequently used, again, for low effect on fish. And basically the gear is similar whether you're in a lake or in a little stream. The only difference is the size of the gear, and it's adapted to use for the different sized water bodies. Regardless of which gear you're using, there's really two basic types of electrofishing that we talk about. One is electrotaxis, which basically stuns the fish. When we go out and electrofish, the fish are stunned, they'll float up, and you'll see this in a little bit. The other is what's called electrotaxis, which is basically direct current, or DC. And what happens there is the fish are attracted to the current and actually orient themselves in the current so that they can easily be netted, and then we can do our studies on them. We use an electrofishing boat when the water body is big, and I'll go over this real quick. Again, safety is, when you're dealing with 5,000 watts and maybe 10 or 20 amps of electricity in water, you've obviously got to have a number of safety issues. This is an electrofishing boat. This box here is actually the box that I have right here. That's an electroshocker. That allows us to manipulate the AC or DC currents depending on what we want to do, and I'll show you that in a little bit, and allows us to do different types of electric current to the water to make it most effective depending on the water quality. The boat here is basically, here are 3 people that would operate it. You have a boat driver, and right next to him is this box. That's actually a 5,000 watt generator. Okay? It provides the power which goes into this box. And then this box distributes the power to these poles, which have, you can't see it very well here, there are wires that are hanging down. And that's what basically provides the electrical part to the water. And then the boat itself is aluminum, so it provides the ground. So what happens is there's an electrical field in here that is used to collect the fish. So if the fish gets into this area, they're going to be stunned or orient into the current, and we will wind up catching them. And then this is just an example of us electrofishing with a boat. Again, you have a person that's up front. All right, you got a boat driver here. That box that I showed you before is under here. It's on a console. This is the generator. And the person up front also has a safety switch right here. He's on a foot switch. So he puts his weight on the pedal, and that will allow electrical current to go to those poles that I showed you before. And it's a safety feature. If for some reason he reaches over that railing too far and decides to go for a swim, his foot comes off of that pedal and the current is shut off to the water, so it provides safety for him. In addition to that, of course, we can shut the box off as a driver, shut the generator off, but right behind this box here is an emergency switch where you just have to hit it and it shuts the power off to everything immediately. So there's a number of safety features, but because again, you're dealing with electricity and water. Here, he's reaching for a fish, and if you look right there, there's one fish that's actually floated up and has been stunned. This next picture here, there's one, there's another one, and yet a third. Okay, so what happens is the fish come up, nice and easy, we net them. This is a live well which has water in it, so we take them, put them in there, do our sampling, and then bring the fish to process. The next one is also electrofishing. It's a backpack electrofisher. That's what we have right here, and I have it over here, and I'll show you that in a minute. So this is the box, a little bit more close-up. Power comes in here, power goes out here, and then we're allowed to adjust the pulse and the intensity of the electrofishing. But to give you an idea, this is the electrofishing box. This is, and that's feedback. This is something you just wear, just like this. Put it right on. And there are 2 aspects to it. Again, this is the positive, and this is the ground. We'll be walking in the street. We'll have weight on, okay, and really heavy electrical gloves. And Aaron would turn it on. Okay, so now it turns on, and then there are a number of safety features. You can shut it off. Okay. So if we're walking along and I can't do something, the person that's netting can actually shut it off. This doesn't work until I push this switch down. Okay, so this would be not active until I do that, and once I do that, then it goes off. And again, if I lose the pole, no current. The third thing this backpack has on, in terms of safety, is if I tilt over too much, it will actually shut off. And the fourth thing is if we get in water, and we've had that happen, if we get up to where water starts hitting against this portion of the shock or more, it will actually shut off. So there are 4 safety features on this, and basically protect the samples. But I would be, if I was the person with backpack, I would be walking, Aaron, there's a net. She would have a net, I would shock, she'd net the fish with the net and then into the bucket as well. So that basically, it's the same principle as the boat. It's just more compact and more smaller streams. So that's electrofishing. Then the next thing is nets. I just brought a couple different nets. You probably all know what a seine is. It's basically just a wall of mesh. I have one over there. We'll show you that afterwards if anybody's interested. But just for catching smaller fish. You have two people, one person here, and in this case the net here, or the handle, substitutes for the picture for another person. And two people would walk in the water, just pulling this net. It has weights on the bottom, it floats on the top, and then it would kind of trap and bring it into shore and trap the fish. You get smaller fish, minnows and things of that nature. This is a trap net, a larger net, and it's basically built on a funnel type of design. There's a lead that goes out here, if you will, a net that goes all the way to shore. The fish hit that, follow it in, and they get in here, they go through this funnel, and they can't find their way out. So that's how they get captured. And then you empty the fish into a live well at the other end. Once we get the fish, this is the live well, we'll identify them, and then we'll get length measurements on them, weight, and then in this particular case, just to show you a little bit more we might do, this is a tag, which has information on, it has a number, coded number that we would have, when it was originally tagged, record its length, weight, other information, and when it gets recaptured, we'd be able to tell maybe growth, movement, or you can even use it for population estimates. The other thing here is you see there's a little mark there. That's basically removal of scales for aging, and we're going to talk a lot more about aging in a little bit. The next thing is how do we catch those ichthyoplankton? We use, it's called an Ichthyoplankton net, and usually it's pulled by a boat. It has a flow meter on here. It's basically just a gauge. It's put over the side, it's attached to a rope, and this will spin. Okay, and as it spins, the meter will read it. We then know that we can then convert the meter readings, how much we traveled, and have an idea of how long. If we went 10 meters, for example, we know the diameter of this net actually is a half a meter. We can actually, it's a cylinder then, and it actually calculates the volume for it. So we can say we put 10 fish per cubic foot, for example. So the net just basically filters the water, and at the end, we'll hold the net and basically rinse things down all the way to the back end of this little cog end here, which is held on by a clamp. All the water, fish, and debris are collected in here, and then this is poured into the jar. And we wind up with a sample that looks like something on the bottom here. And if you look, this is actually a jar of water and debris. But if you look right there, and right there are those little ichthyoplankton, those little fish that I just sent around, are in that sample. That's an actual sample from the Connecticut River. Again, most of what we do is dictated by regulatory requirements. You know, the ones that we might be familiar with are Clean Water Act, Superfund, and indirect discharge for ski areas and that. Again, sampling summary, we just looked at a variety of different methods, and specifically you've talked a lot about electrofishing, and our goals basically vary depending on what regulatory program we're working in, whether it's contaminant monitoring or fish population, or just assessing what type of fish community is present. So now we're going to start talking about a little bit of studies that we have conducted throughout New England. And in keeping with the Halloween theme, there first. We're going to talk about something that's really scary in terms of fishing. This is our sampling crew. I'm not sure if I'm Frankenstein or Dracula here, but the title of this is What Lies Under the City. Our study is going to go underground. You think pumpkins and a haunted house up on a hill is scary? Wait till you see what we had to do. Again, this was conducted for a facility down in Hartford, Connecticut. And the facility actually provides air conditioning to the city of Hartford. So it's a business, it takes in water, uses the water in the countercurrent to cool things, and then provides air conditioning. So when it gets done with the water, it comes in and goes out. It doesn't really add anything except heat. And back, and I think it was 04, yeah, it is 04, the EPA put out new regulations which look at two areas of plants that operate in that manner. One is called for the intake, where they're taking in water, and a lot of times that's the ichthyoplankton sampling that we do, but also the discharge, and in this case the discharge is going to have heat in it. We were asked to sample the Park River, which is right here. This is downtown Hartford. And as you can see, that area there is Park River. What you're looking at here in the front is the Connecticut River. It actually flows underground. It's basically big culverts, for lack of a way of saying it. And it flows for about 2 miles. All these brown things and yellow things are buildings. This is totally enclosed. And the place where we had to sample and look at the discharge was about 1,400 feet up these culverts or conduits. We actually sampled over here, which is where it starts to go underground. Prior to that, it's actually above. It's a stream that flows above the ground, like a normal stream would. So we had to go sampling. And we were going to basically just look at what type of fish might be in there, capture the fish, and then collect, identify, weigh, measure, and release. My first reaction was, are you kidding? I'm going to go sample in a culvert? So here we are again, back just to give you a little more. There's the Park River. And if we get a little closer, we can see there are two sides to it. This center wall goes all the way down underground. The conduit is 22 feet wide, 15 feet from bottom to top. And the bottom is actually concrete. I mean, it's a tube. There are boulders and gravel and sand and that type of stuff on the bottom. But for the most part, if you go down below that, which is maybe an inch or two, you hit concrete. So it's basically a tube. And this gives you an idea looking into the conduit. It's about 3 feet deep, and our goal is obviously to sample all 4 seasons. Okay, and the reason being is on the right side where you see the little bit of vapor starting to form, it's just water, but it's water vapor, is where the discharge is. So, and on the south side, basically is what it would call natural stream, if there is such a thing going through a conduit. So we're basically trying to look at what's here versus what's here. Sometimes we couldn't get to it. We did not figure how we could get a sub in to actually sample. So we kind of had to bypass 1 or 2 of the seasons. As you can see, it completely inundated. The Connecticut River had high flows during the springtime, early springtime. Interesting, we're going up a conduit, okay, an enclosed area, or semi-enclosed, and we had to be very careful. Of course, we had to have our gloves on to protect our hands and from the electrical current, safety vests, and so on. But in addition to that, as a safety precaution, we actually carried a scuba tank so that the sampler and the boat driver could actually have access to air should something go amiss in there. We had CO2 monitors because we're in a gasoline engine pushing the boat. And then the other thing we had was the safety personnel on shore. Back at the mouth of these conduits, we actually put a person. And on boat, we had a walkie-talkie, if you will, to talk to them, because once you're in the conduit, you have no cell service and you have no way to contact. So if we had some issue, we needed the discharge shut off or whatever the case may be, we would have to radio to the person that was at the mouth of the conduit, because that would get communications that way, and then they would have to communicate with the appropriate people. So we're going to head up the conduit, and the first thing you do is you say goodbye to the light. And in the background there, this is the Connecticut River, and we're going up. This gives you an idea what it looks like, or maybe looks much better on the computer. Well, you can sort of see it. Over here is the wall. You can see there's a sort of an expansion joint that goes around. That's the ceiling. It's obviously pretty dark in there. If you turn the lights out, you'll really appreciate the darkness. But basically, our boat is 16 feet long. This is the electrofishing boat I showed you before. We have those poles that stick out that are probably 3 feet. So we're about 21 feet long, if you will, from tip of the pole to the back of the boat engine. We're going up. Now we got to go back out a quarter of a mile. So how do you get out? You got to turn around. Well, I don't know if any of you have seen Austin Powers, Man of Mystery, when he was riding, he got stuck in a hallway with a little go-kart, and he had to turn around and goes up a foot, backs up a foot, goes up a foot, backs up a foot, goes up a foot, backs up a foot. That's how we had to turn around in here. You had to be very careful, because if you went backwards and the prop hit the wall there, you're basically getting pushed out by a little electric engine, and that's it. So here we are, nice and dark, heading up to the discharge. And again, I'm saying, why are we doing this? So if you turn the lights out, it's pitch black. You cannot literally see your hand in front of your face. So we always had battery lights, electric motor. But the only time I've been in a tunnel, in a boat, where I wound up going out, and again, it wasn't fishing, but it was down in Disney. The only thing I could think of is we went around the corner, the first thing I was going to see was It's a Small World. But surprisingly, that didn't happen. Okay, and I'm not sure at the moment it was good or bad, but what we did find were a variety of fish. We saw catfish, we saw carp, bluegills, gizzard shad, blueback herring, American shad, eels, you name it, they were there. As a matter of fact, in those culverts we found about 20 species of fish over our sampling. So it was quite interesting to see this diversity of fish community in these culverts, when I was wondering why we were doing it in the first place. And one of the things we found just in this study was that when we sampled on the south side, which was the non-heat side, the suckers were predominant. And on the north side, catfish were predominant. We did find, quite interesting, and you think about it, quite reasonable. In the spring, when the water is colder, okay, we found most of the fish, and a lot of different species of fish, almost right at the discharge because it's warmer. So these fish were actually attracted to it. In the summer, there was nothing in the North Channel, or North Conduit. Okay, why? Because the water was a lot warmer, and the fish could actually find cooler water, more in their temperature range when you out in the Connecticut River or wherever. So basically, as a summary, what we found was there was a wide variety of fish species. Fish have been both positively and negatively affected by the conduits. In the spring, we found a lot of fish by the discharge. In the summer, they avoided it. And probably the biggest thing I learned on it is preconceived notions could be wrong. You never underestimate fish and life. They'll find a way to do whatever they need to do. Moving on. Next one is we're going to talk about the 6 Great Lakes contaminant monitoring. And you guys are probably saying, 6? Huh, doesn't he know what he's talking about? Well, the reality is, at one time, for about 3 weeks, a month type of time frame, there was actually a 6th Great Lake. Anybody know which lake that was?
Lake Champlain.
Lake Champlain, that's absolutely right. So this work is actually being done to look at long-term trends of contaminants. Heavy metals, organic compounds such as PCBs and things like that are in fish and how it's trended over years. We looked at the 5 lakes, Lake Superior, Ontario, Erie, Huron, and Michigan, and every year we looked at Cayuga Lake and Lake Champlain. Now, we were just involved with the biology aspect of this, looking at some of the biological measurements and preparing samples for chemical analysis. But the goal was really to get long-term trends and contaminants and identify potentially contaminant sources. Primary species was lake trout. And these fish, are found in all these lakes that we're talking about. Every other year, walleye are actually looked at from Lake Erie, just as an additional fish species to monitor these contaminants. What we did is we were biologists and getting things ready for the chemists, but also getting biological data which will help interpret the data. We would deal with a whole fish and then basically take groups of fish, five fish in each group, and create chemical samples. But before we did that, each fish would get measured and weighed. We'd look at the sex, and if it was female, what level of maturation, whether they were ripe and had eggs ready to be deposited or not, as the case may be. And then there was two ways that the fish were identified initially in the field, and it's used for a lot for fisheries work that's done in the Great Lakes by Michigan DNR and New York DEC and so on. And basically these are fin clips and coated wire tags. What will happen is a lot of these fish are raised in a hatchery. So prior to release, they'll go ahead and let me back a step here. They'll mark the fish. We'll talk a little bit about that. One of the ways they mark it is they'll clip a fin, okay, and they'll have a special sequence. So, for example, if the right upper fin or pectoral fin is clipped, every 6 years it would be the same clip. And then the next year would be, that would be year one, year two might be the left one, and so on. So that way when you capture the fish, you know that it's either a 6-year-old, for example, or a 12-year-old or an 18-year-old. So it's one way to age and know a little bit more about the fish. The other is what's known as a coated wire tag. And this is a tag that's actually inserted in the fish, and I'll show you that in a minute. When we have it, we also need to age the fish using age structures. Many of you probably are aware that scales are used and have rings around them, sort of like you would age a tree. We'll see that a little bit, but that's basically how you age fish. Scales or other structures. In our case, we did otoliths, and for those of you that may recognize it, those are ear bones. Okay, they're internal to the fish. By the way, these fish are, arrive to us as frozen. And basically these are removed, and I'll show you those in a minute. And those also are prepared and have rings, as do a new method that we were testing in conjunction with Michigan DNR, looking at the maxillary bone, which is a bone that's, in the top of the mouth. Okay, so we had different things, and again, you could tag fish with dart tags, which wasn't used in this study. But here is a fish being tagged with a coated wire tag. And this is an example of a coated wire tag. As you can see, it has a number, and that number will tell you when that fish was released, where it was released, and because it's a hatchery fish, when it basically hatched from egg. Unfortunately, the coated wire tag is not that size. There is one there, there's one there, there's probably 4 or 5 on this penny. If you think of a straight pin that you get where you buy a shirt and have straight pin in it, it's about 1 inch long. That would be about 25 tags, okay? And it's probably thicker than these coated wire tags. So when these fish come back and we are processing them, we have to find that tag in about a 15 to 20-year-old fish maybe, and it may be 10 pounds or so. We got to find it. We know it's going to be up in the nose area, and what it is they're magnetized. So we have a special wand we can run over the head and say, oh, he has a tag, and then we'll start looking for it through dissection and take piece by piece until we find that little tag, and then read it and get the information on it. So the other things we do, and I'll pass it out, is otoliths. Again, these are little ear bones. They're probably a 1/2 inch long and about 1/4 inch wide. And maxillary bones. And I'll send a couple of them around. What you'll see is the things with a little green in it actually are little plugs of resin. And in the middle of those are little white pieces of foam, actual otoliths. We section these. So if you look carefully in the middle of that plug, you'll see the white. I know they're small, but I figured that's a good reason. And that's a maxillary bone. So here's what you're getting past. Basically, this is what I call the plug. It's basically resin, fiberglass type of resin. Let's see if I can do that. Oh, probably I'll use this, huh? That's the otolith right there. We put Play-Doh, stick the otolith in it, and it holds it. And we then fill this cylinder up with, it's basically West Marine fiberglass material with hardener. And the reason we do that is it holds that bone so that it can be sectioned. We have a bone saw over here, and this is the blade. It looks just like a circular saw if you want to think of it that way, or actually a meat cutter, if you will, in the deli. You know, the circular blade. And here we are, there's the otolith in the middle, and we're sectioning that otolith. Once we section it, we put it on a microscope slide and look at it microscopically. So here's the microscope. You recognize, basically, this is the standard microscope where you look through. And then this third, or trinocular port, is for camera mounting. That up there is a camera. It's attached to the laptop, and this is the picture of the otolith that you would see. And this gives you a little bit better idea. This is the otolith, and as you can see, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, etc. So we'll age this fish. This is about a 10-year-old fish, if I remember correctly. Over here is a section of that maxillary bone. And here you can see this fish is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 9, 11 annuli or 11 rings. And that's how we age those fish. Okay, so why do that? Why go through all that effort? As you can imagine, especially in the otoliths, a lot of effort. Well, what we found, or what EPA found, was that if you didn't take age into account, if you look at these black dots, they're kind of all over the place. However, once you correct for age, you get a nice relationship between contaminant levels and the fish that we collect. So it's very important in helping interpret that data. So in summary, we're doing this work, and we're doing it for long-term monitoring and using the age data and all the biological data to try to interpret how our lake and the Great Lakes are faring from contaminants, and and which ultimately factors into human health. And the last segment, as we're getting close to lunch here, is going to be the Grand Isle Fish Hatchery. And we were involved with this actually when it was down in Kingsland Bay, but it did get moved in terms of site location to Grand Isle. And for those of you that may not know a lot about Grand Isle, this is the Grand Isle Ferry right here on the left. This bay here is the fish actually return here, and there's a little stream that runs back to the hatchery. The hatchery is located about a mile or so inland from here, and it raises salmon and trout. And this is what the interior of a hatchery looks like. These are raceways, and the fish are actually in here. These walls are used to basically separate out different size fish. So these might be, the slower growing fish of one age group, and this might be the higher growing fish. So the questions we had to look at were, why is there 2 intakes? This was actually built with 2 intakes. Why is that? Why do we have one that goes way the heck out almost to the New York, the New York border is what stopped us from going further, almost to the New York border in the lake, which runs right down the middle of the lake. And then the next thing is, why do we process the water? Well, as you know, hatcheries and fish require good quality water. What we would do is we would first look at contaminants, and of course it's Lake Champlain. So it's very, very good quality. We didn't have much concern here in terms of low metals or organics or whatever. One of the things we had to do from a hatchery and a management standpoint is get the right temperature. Salmon basically like to grow, and trout I should say, like to grow in 50 to 60 degree range. If we get over 70s, we can get diseases and death become really more prevalent. And if it's below 50, we don't get a lot of growth. So instead of the hatchery being able to stock out, let's say 8 or 9 inch fish, these fish may never get to be more than 5 or 6 inches when they're ready to be released. So you got to get a certain temperature, an ideal or an optimum temperature. And then we need to keep nitrogen gases at or less than 100%. And we'll talk about why. What we did to study this before the hatchery was built was we went out, this is a temperature probe, so basically we have a meter on one end and a probe in the other, and those white marks on there are actually depth marks, so we know exactly where we're at. And we would lower this over the side and measure 1 foot, 2 feet, 10 feet, 20 feet, and so on. And then we did that every day in August and September for 2 years. And what we found, which we knew, some of this, is that there are 3 strata of water. Top layer is in the 70 degrees. And that green wire or line here is actually 70-degree line. And you can see it varies. This is day 1, day 2. Each column is a day. And this is how deep that 70-degree water is, or in this case, we'll focus on the 50-degree water. And this is how deep we found 50-degree water at the same location. So what are we looking at? Okay, the thing we're looking at now is, look at this peak here. So we're saying on the 19th, is it? Yeah, 19th, we're at the 50-degree water is at 60 feet. Whereas on the 24th or 25th, it's at 150 feet. So it varies widely. And why is that? So to explain what's going on and what we're looking at, I did this, or took Butch in this picture. And what you'll notice, and I'll show you this in the stills, is this is a wave. It goes back and forth. This actually happens sometimes in Lake Champlain in the summer. It's called a seiche, okay, and it used to sway back and forth. And that cold water actually back and forth, the blue being cold, this clear water up here being the warmer water. And wind and other conditions actually set that up, which has a profound effect as to where we're going to be. So if we were on a boat, and this is Crown Point and that's Rouse's Point, and one day we're here, we'll see that there's very little distance to the cold water. But a couple days later, we'll see that it's almost on the bottom. And that's another example. Here you can see it's up around 50 feet. Down here it's 180 feet. Okay, so guess what? For us to get cold water, because we have to mix it to get that 50 or 60 degrees, we had to go down to 180 feet. We get the warm water up here, it's at 30 feet. And the reason it's at 30, not the surface, so you don't get plankton or other debris in it, so it makes it easier to pump. But it basically is warm water. And then with 2 intakes, we can get the temperature we want by mixing in right proportions. So now, good news, we got the temperature, but we now have a dissolved gas problem, okay? Water that is cold and deep holds a lot of nitrogen gas, the bends, if you guys are familiar with that at all. If it gets in your bloodstream, it causes a lot of problems. In fish, it actually causes what's called ecthyophthalmia. It actually causes the eyes to pop out because of internal pressures in the body, forcing the eyes out because of the pressure. So we don't want that in our fish either. So we had to figure out how to get rid of the supersaturation. And what we did is we had a pontoon boat where we developed put these columns to see how high we had to build columns to degas this. And the way you degas it is just pour water and let it bubble or trickle. So each one of those columns over here have little plastic beads in it which help break up the water and aerate it. So what we would do is we bring this out to a specific area, lower the pumps over here to the depth, bring it up into this tank, and measure the nitrogen gas percentage in the water before we run it through the columns, and then measure it in the columns. And then from that, we're able to build the facility to deal with these things. This is the actual description. This is from the hatchery a couple weeks ago. And as you can see, there was 2 separate lines, 30 and 180 feet deep. You'll notice over here it says shallow, and there's another pump over there, which is the deep. And they use that to mix. Okay, and as the water comes up and is distributed, you see these, which are now solid, instead of on the boat, which were 1 foot lengths. And this is where they degas and get rid of the nitrogen, and then the water is flowed to the fish, and the fish presumably are happy with the conditions of being reared. One other thing I just want to mention, which has, this hatchery was actually built with what was called best management practices. This is a clarifier, sort of like you would see in a wastewater treatment plant. The fish waste and the uneaten food all goes into this clarifier, gets settled, and then is used for fertilizer rather than going into our lake. So, as we know, we were trying to get great water quality for the hatchery, get the temperature we need, and the nitrogen gas so that it was acceptable for rearing fish. And we did that with 2 intakes and the columns reduce. And with that, I just summarized what we talked about. We talked about fish and the different diversity and adaptations. We talked about how we collect fish. We talked about several investigations, one where we went into a conduit, one where we're looking at contaminants in fish in lakes. And then, of course, we talked about the Lake Champlain and the Grand Isle Fish Hatchery and the stratification. With that, maybe a quick question or two. I noticed I just went a minute into lunch. So, any questions? Yes?
In capturing the fish, and examining them, and then releasing them, do they die?
No. Oh, but yeah, I mean, nothing's 100%, but probably 99.9% yes. The electrofishing is it's one of the reasons we use electrofishing. It stuns the fish, and if it's used properly, not too strong or anything, the fish recover within minutes. And actually, depending on the water quality, we've had fish where we've gone over, they floated up, and by the time we go to net them, they've gone. Okay, it depends on the water quality, but they're very, very few. Now, there's occasionally it could be possible that 1 fish or 2 fish may succumb, but other than that, very, very good way. In addition, when you use nets, it's a lot more stressful on the fish. They're bouncing into the nets, you're handling them, you're bringing them on board, and so on.
How long can they be out of the water and handled? Say I'm fishing and I catch one and I want to throw it back. How long?
The short answer is as short as possible. But basically, I would say if you had them for a couple, a minute or two, they'd probably be fine. The longer it goes, the more stressed they'll be, the less likely they'll, be in good health for at least a while. Yes?
How many eggs does a mature female typically lay, and what is their survival rate?
Good questions. The number of fish, number of eggs in a particular fish species varies. Okay, so and obviously by size of the fish too. But for example, white perch, which we've seen, are what's called broadcast spawners. Basically, they're up in the water column. They release, they fertilize, and they're floating. They go everywhere. They probably, a mature female probably has 20 or 30,000 eggs. Some other fish, where they might make nests and things like that, I'm thinking of trout, they probably are more in the several thousand eggs. Now, in terms of survival, we've done a lot of studies on that, on specific types of fish. The theory is, if you have a female and she has 2,000 eggs or 20,000 eggs, how many do you need to maintain your population? Basically, out of those 20,000 eggs, you need 2 to survive to adulthood. And that's basically what the calculations when we look at the impact on ichthyoplankton. But to answer your question more specifically, a lot of the mortality, you might lose half of the fish in probably the first month. Those little fish that we passed around, those are really nice bite-sized fish for smaller fish, and we'll feed on them. So they're lost through that, they're lost through disease, they're lost to, they wind up in the wrong place, if you will, at the wrong time. But basically, the theory is that two fish result out of each of the offspring.
Thank you.
Other questions? Yes.
Yellow perch.
Yes.
We used to have many.
Yeah.
Fish, you could always catch a bucket load of yellow perch. What happened to them?
If I had that, I would have published the data. To answer your question, you know, to be fair, I think there's been a number of studies. You know, some people think that there's overfishing, and that possibly may be. Some think that there's competition. The white perch have come in and will compete in some cases for that. Others may be just habitat issues, you know, use of the land and runoff and things of that nature. So there's a whole host of factors that are looked at, but I'm not sure anybody has identified which specifically causes that. But I know you used to be able to catch larger fish, and you used to be able, you know, by the bucket. And now if you catch a few yellow perch, you're doing good, especially in the wintertime when high ice fishing. Yes?
I guess I know about salmon, how their eggs get fertilized, but you just mentioned the white perch.
Yeah.
And they've got 20,000 eggs and they just go floating away. How do they get fertilized?
The males are right by and they release their product too. Yeah, and they get fertilized in the water column and away they go. So why is it 20,000 versus 2,000? Because that way is not a very efficient way to get your young to survive. You know, just sort of throw them to the wind, if you will. So you can almost get some information just by the number of eggs a female might carry as to how they reproduce. Well, I thank you very much again for inviting me, and look forward to hoping you have a good session next week.